Greetings, sisters. I'm so excited to get to open the Word with you for a little bit this week. I want to pick up kind of where our story last week ended. If you tuned in last week, we talked about Joseph. And where we're going to pick up this week is with the next stories in the Bible. At this point, Joseph is dead. Joseph rose to power in Egypt, and when his brothers came, he forgave them of their past wrongs against him, and they settled in Egypt. And so where our story picks up now is many years later, still in Egypt, where Joseph was when he passed. We're still in Egypt, but we have a new Pharaoh. In fact, we have a Pharaoh that never heard of Joseph, doesn't know about Yahweh, doesn't know about the God of Joseph, doesn't know how Yahweh, the great I Am, had ever helped his country. And all he knows is that when he walks out on the palace balcony and he looks out into Egypt, he sees so many foreigners. They're all the descendants of Joseph and his brothers. They're all Israelites. And the Pharaoh becomes very frightened with the numbers, and he fears there are more foreigners here than there are Egyptians. They could rise to power and overtake us. We must stop it. So he makes an edict that only a Pharaoh could make, and he calls the midwives in. And if you remember, he tells the midwives, if a baby boy is born to an Israelite, I want him dead. Now, it doesn't work, gratefully, because God's hand and God's providence is all over this story. And so what happens is the midwives fear God more than they fear Pharaoh, and they do not follow Pharaoh's edict. So Pharaoh has to come up with plan B. All right, plan B. You know what? I'm taking the women out of this plan because women have a big heart. I'm putting the men in charge. I'm putting the soldiers in charge. So soldiers, here's what you're going to do. If a baby boy is born to an Israelite, I want that boy tossed into the Nile River. And that's where we pick up with the story of Moses. This is when an unfortunate time that Moses was born to a mother named Jochebed. And as I have mother, I think of what Jochebed must have gone through in those years, in those months of pregnancy leading up to the birth, fearing, am I going to have a son? Will it be a son? If so, how will I hide my child? If it is a son, how long can I hide my child? How long can I protect him? And you know the rest of that, it is a boy. And his name is Moses, and Jochebed is able, for a little while, I guess, to hide Moses and to keep him quiet. But you can only do that so long. And don't you know, every moment was lived in fear that the baby would cry and the soldiers would come and the army would take her child and toss him into the Nile River. And so Jochebed came up with a plan. I'm sure you know the plan. And I'm sure as a mother, a grandmother, or maybe an aunt, a teacher, you think that is the worst plan ever. How could that be her best option? Because you know what she had to do? Jochebed made a basket, and she tried her very best to make it watertight. And she placed her baby in the basket, and then she went to the very Nile River, the very place where Pharaoh said, I'm going to kill your baby. And she placed her baby on purpose into the Nile River with the hopes that, number one, that baby would not drown, and number two, the many crocodiles would not find him, because the Nile was known to be filled with crocodiles. And again, as a mother, if that's your best plan, I feel for you. Oh, my heart hurts for Jochebed as she had to let go of that basket in the Nile River with her best plan put into action. But you know what? God can take what are the worst of our plans, and if we offer them to Him for His glory, He can take them and make them great and successful. And God's hand, once again, is all over the life of Moses. And you know that Pharaoh's daughter, the daughter of the very man who wanted to kill Moses, finds Moses, takes him, adopts him, and Moses grows up in the palace of Pharaoh. Now, I think that's just got to be an odd place to be. You know, Moses realized he was different. But yet he grew up a prince. He spoke Egyptian. He was educated in Egyptian ways and culture and school. He looked the part of an Egyptian. He dressed in their clothing. He wore their jewelry. But he knew he was an Israelite. And one day, when he saw an Egyptian mistreating an Israelite, his anger got the best of him. And he killed the Egyptian, and because of it had to flee. And that's where we're going to pick up with this story of Moses. Now, this whole series is called Defining Moments, and there are so many defining moments in the story of Moses. We're just going to take one of the first ones. So if you have your Bibles, I want you to turn to Exodus chapter 2. And we're going to be picking up with Moses living a life in exile as a fugitive. He has fled for his life. He knows if he's found by Pharaoh or any of Pharaoh's people, he will be put to death because he's a murderer. So he finds himself in the wilderness. But 40 years later, we're going to pick up with Let's see, 2:19. Let's go to chapter 2, verse 19. When Moses arrives in this foreign land, he is known as an Egyptian. So it's obvious Moses looks the part, sounds the part of an Egyptian. It's obvious he's been raised Egyptian. But in the next two verses of that chapter, he's no longer Egyptian. 40 years pass in those two verses. And it says in verse 21, Moses was content to live with the man, and he gave Zipporah, his daughter, to Moses. So Moses lives in this new foreign land. He has to learn a new language. He has to dress differently. He's going to now eat different foods. He's got a new life, a new identity. And he's married, he's going to raise children, and he's content. And the one thing we know even today is that when you have those times of contentment, don't get too comfortable. It's very possible they're not going to last. And that's exactly what happens. So Moses becomes a tender of the flocks. He tends the flocks for his father-in-law. So pick up in chapter 3. Here's what happens. In the middle of this tranquility and in the middle of his life as a fugitive, his quietness, here's what happens. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the back of the desert, and he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. So I wanted to read that because here is Moses in a nowhere place, out in the middle of nowhere, and he's getting ready to encounter God. And you know what? God can find us even when we're in the middle of nowhere. There's no hiding from God. And he's content. He's tending his sheep and his flocks. And the angel of the Lord is getting ready to appear to Moses through a burning bush. And you know the story. Moses sees a bush burning and he comes close, but a voice stops and says, "Stop. Don't come any closer. It's hallowed ground. Take off your shoes." And we're going to pick up with verse 5. "Do not draw near to this place. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground." And then he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob." And it's interesting what Moses did next. Moses hid his face, as if that's going to help. I think Moses sensed what's coming. I am getting ready to be called to a duty I don't want. I'm going to try to hide from it. And it didn't work. And so he goes on to say in verse 10, here's the calling. "Come now, Moses, I will send you to Pharaoh that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. There's God's calling in the middle of contentment, in the middle of obscurity. Here's the calling. All tranquility is about to leave Moses' life. But is Moses excited about it? Absolutely not. Look at verse 11. And Moses says to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring out the children of Israel out of Egypt? You know what he's saying? Why me? Why did you pick me? Lord, what in the world about my past resume and my life makes you think I can do this? You know who I am, right? I was raised a prince. I'm kind of spoiled. I was the prince of Egypt. And now all I do is tend flocks. What in those talents, skill sets makes you think I can do this? Besides, you know, I'm a wanted man. I don't want to go back. That's his first excuse. And God says, I'll be with you. Didn't satisfy. Second excuse we find in verse 13. Indeed, when the children of Israel say, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, what's his name? What am I going to say? In other words, he says now, who are you? I don't even know you. What's your name? But the amazing thing is God's already told him from the burning bush, I'm the God of Abraham. I'm the God of Isaac. I'm the God of Jacob. And so God goes on to say, my name is I am. You tell them, I am sent you. I am the God of Abraham. I am the God of Jacob. I am the God of Isaac. And third excuse, Moses said, but what if they don't believe me? What if they don't listen to me? This time, God's going to give him some physical proof. He said, Moses, what's in your hand? What is in your hand? And don't you know, Moses looked down and went, it's just a rod, a staff that I use with my sheep. That's all I've got. And you know what? God used that to his glory, what Abraham had right in his hand. Fourth excuse is still coming. Abraham is not convinced he's the right person. Oh, Lord, I'm not eloquent of speech, neither now nor since you have spoken to the servant. I am slow of speech and I am slow of tongue. He says, I'm not a public speaker. I have a fear of public speaking, Lord. I have been talking to nothing but sheep for 40 years. And you know what dawned on me when I read this? It's very possible he's now speaking in a different language. Maybe part of his reluctance came from the fact that for the first half of his life, he spoke Egyptian, and now he's learned Hebrew. He's bilingual. Maybe I can't be jumping back and forth from English to Hebrew back and forth. I can't do that, Lord. God answers that one. Who made your mouth? In other words, God says, I've told you I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but I'm going to remind you now, I'm the God of creation. I'm the one that made you. I got this. Now the fifth one. Please, Lord, send by the hand whomever else you can send. In other words, Lord, please, I'm begging you, not me. I think it's interesting in verse 14. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. That shows great patience, because as a mother, to get 5 straight excuses, my anger kindles way before number 5. But he waited for the 5th one. And he said, I'm sending with you your brother. I want to go back and look at his defining moment. And I'm going to say that it is in verse 11. When Moses said, who am I, Lord, that I should go? Why have you picked me? I have no talents. I have no skill set. I'm ill-equipped for this job. And I want to suggest that sometimes God calls us to do things we feel very ill-equipped as women of God to do. But here's what we see from Moses' defining moment, that when God gives you a calling, God equips you for that calling. He doesn't want our excuses. He doesn't want to hear why we can't. He wants to say to us what he said to Moses, baby, what have I put in your hand? I've already put right in your hand what I want you to use. Pick it up. I'm going to do great things with it. What have you got in your hand? And when I started thinking about that, I thought, you know what? I've got a kitchen. Could I fix food? I've got a cell phone. Could I call? Could I text encouragement? I can write a letter. I can do these simple things with the simple objects God has put in my hand. And just like in the story of Moses, God can take those simple offerings and do great things to his glory. He doesn't want my excuse. He wants me to look around right where I am and find what he's already given me. And for me to realize when God calls me to use it, he equips me with the power to do that. And so, sisters, as we look at the defining moment from Moses, I think we should remember God calls us to things that we're reluctant to do today. But we have to remember whatever God has placed in front of us, no matter the magnitude, he will equip us to do that. So with that thought in mind today, sisters, go boldly. Go boldly.